Hello, and thank you for being part of the Community Mitzvah Month and keeping the stories of the Holocaust alive. My name is Debbie Kaplan, and I am the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors Millie and Abraham Zuckerman of blessed memory. My grandfather, who I called Zaida, was a Schindler Jew who passed away 7.5 years ago, and my grandmother, who I call Baba, passed away this August. Both of their stories of survival during the Holocaust were truly remarkable and helped to shape the lives that they would go on to lead here in the United States. My entire family was truly blessed to have them so close by, as their impact upon us to be positive, live a Jewish life, and to give others was so evident in all they did. As a parent of two young daughters, I feel so fortunate that they were able to learn from my Baba and Zaida firsthand. Now that they are gone, it is not just our obligation, but truly a privilege to continue to tell their stories. The Holocaust was an event that should never be forgotten, and it is our job to ensure that these stories are shared within our community and further on. I am deeply grateful that our Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West is so committed and devoted to doing just that. Together at events like this, I know that all of us can make a great impact, and for that, I thank you. I am honored today to introduce the Director of Holocaust and Education and Newark Initiatives, Elise Shane Brown.
Good evening. Thank you so much, Debbie, for sharing those beautiful words for us. Having had the pleasure and privilege of meeting your grandparents on several occasions, I am sure that they are so proud of the legacy that you are continuing. Welcome everyone this evening. I am so thrilled that we are all here to share in this special mitzvah of hearing firsthand the story of a Holocaust survivor. We at the Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West Holocaust Council strive every day to honor as many stories from the Holocaust that we can and pass them on from generations to come. As we know, time is running out for all of our survivors. We like to say, may they all live to 120, and we may have many, many more years to hear their stories. We also know that this is not a reality. And it is our job to continue to pass them on and tell our children and our children's children of what happened during the Holocaust, so that we know never forget is not in the future. Never forget is now. So as you listen today, and I glance down and see that we have 30 participants already on, if each one of you can make a promise to share the story you hear today with at least one more person, then 60 people will hear the story of survival of Trudy Gompers, which is truly a blessing and will always help us to go forward. So if everyone could make that promise here today, you can all kind of shake your heads or raise your hands, okay? That from today, you will share that story with at least one more person. After Trudy is done speaking, we will take Q&A in the chat, and we are always here to answer any questions that you may have about the work that we do and the things that the Holocaust Council is able to help with. So thank you, Trudy, for speaking with us, and take it away.
Hi. You know, ever since I was a little girl, I had this special thing with my mother. It was like I knew what she was thinking. And when I would say it, she would get all crazy. But we all have experiences like that with people that we're close to. And most of the time we just laugh it off as coincidence. But even though my mom has been dead for over 20 years, we're still in touch. We're still close. She haunts me. She feeds me information, and she guides me towards truths I've never even sought. And although I'm considered a survivor of the Holocaust, I was just a little girl then, and remember things from the eyes of a little girl. The internment camp, the air raids, the bombs, the hardships, the hunger, they were just part of my everyday life. So when I was scared, I went into the loving arms of my parents. My grandparents, we had to leave them behind in Vienna. They were sent to a concentration camp, Terezin, it's also known as Theresienstadt, where many of the Jews of Vienna were sent. It was a terrible place, beyond nightmares, beyond imagination, but no better than the rest of the many concentration camps that there were during that time. I never knew much about my grandparents other than they owned an apartment that my grandmother, and very beautiful, that she had green eyes, and yes, she loved us very, very much. There were things about my grandparents that my mother never spoke about. It was too painful. But I didn't give it much thought. After all, I was a baby when I left Vienna, and the thoughts I had of my grandparents were distant. But in the years since my mother died, I want to tell you that I've been in touch with her, just like when she was alive. And it doesn't happen often, but when it does, there's no question that she's communicating with me. A few years ago, I sat down at my computer, and some days I spent all day, all night typing, and the words came out like water from a faucet. The strange thing is that I felt I was my mother's channel, that we were both writing this book. I'll hold it up. It's the day we first arrived in America. It's called Prisms of Light, Reflections of Shattered Glass. Now, I discovered so much in the writing of this book, things that my mother never even knew about. She has led me to uncover the past, to let you know about my grandparents, to quiet their scream from the grave. We don't know where the grave is, but somewhere. They want to make sure you know what happened, that they didn't die in vain, that we must never, ever allow what happened in Terezin, in all the concentration camps, to all the children, to all the victims of the Holocaust, happen again. My name is Trudy Gompers. I was born in Vienna, Austria, in February of 1937, 84 years ago. Vienna was a cultured city, and it was full of opera, concerts, coffee houses, dances, waltzes, parties. And the Jews of Vienna were a strong part of the economic structure of the city. It's a fact that 62% of all the lawyers in Vienna were Jews, representing everyone. 7% of all the doctors were Jews, treating everybody. 30% were college professors, never mind the teachers, that taught everyone. Jews were part of the cultural strength of the city, and everybody benefited by our presence in the community, in the city of Vienna. Fanny Hertz was my grandmother. She raised 5 children, among them my mom, Anne. My mother married my dad, Sigmund Klein, and I was their second child. My mom was a dress designer. She created fabulous gowns, and my dad worked for the most exclusive fur salon in Vienna. By the way, her name was Anne Klein, but it wasn't the Anne Klein. But she made clothes as nice as, if not better than Anne Klein. So not long after I was born, dark clouds came along. The waltzes stopped. The parties that were such a part of the city of Vienna stopped. A new party came to town, the Nazi Party. Everything changed very, very quickly. All that was no more. Hitler knew how to create hate. He knew how to make people aware of differences. Why? For power. He picked on Jews because he was an anti-Semite. All of a sudden, people that had been part of the lovely Viennese community that had benefited by Jewish lawyers and doctors and Indian chiefs, they started to turn their back on the Jews, and they gave him their allegiance because he promised the people of Vienna, of Austria, that he would better their lives. So the hate machine began to churn at the expense of everybody that was different, but mostly the Jews. If you didn't join everybody, if you didn't join the Nazis, you were discriminated against. He changed his into mesmerized demons. At the height of the Holocaust, some of his family, some of his followers actually made lampshades out of Jewish skin. The term Holocaust is used to describe the killing of 6 million Jews as part of a program that was entitled by Hitler, The Final Solution of the Jewish Question. Of course, there were 11 million people that were killed during that time, but we're talking about the Holocaust because that was the main thrust. The solution was accomplished in stages: laws to remove us from civil society, concentration camps, and last, extermination. At the beginning, we thought it was just a matter of waiting things out. June of 1938, June 30th of 1938, I was 15 months old, just a baby. It was my parents' wedding anniversary. And my father came home with a letter stating that he was not allowed to employ my father any longer. No Jews could be employed any longer. So there was no jobs, no welfare, no health benefits, nothing. We couldn't even help each other. We were all in the same sinking ship. Would this blow over? You know, the Nazis asked us to leave. The deadline was November 10th, Kristallnacht. It was only 6 months away. They said that if we didn't leave the country by that date, Jews would be placed in concentration camps. Who would have imagined, who would have known what that meant? And they kept the pressure on us. One morning, my mother was bathing me in the bathtub when Nazi soldiers, the brown shirts, stormed into the apartment, demanding that my mother take her bucket and scrub brush and follow them to scrub the streets. My mother agreed. She says, but let me just take care of my infant. She's in the bathtub. No, you come now, Jew. So a kindly neighbor took over. So in the square, my mother was scrubbing the streets on her knees, along with hundreds of other Jewish women, with guards prodding them with their rifle butts. Scrub faster. And my mother's guard was her mailman that she knew for so many years. He'd come out in and have coffee and cake. And he realized that it was her, and he screamed, you Jew, your water's filthy. We can't welcome our Fura with such dirty water. And then he whispered back, go home to your babies. She would have never guessed that he was a Nazi, but there were multitudes of people that came out of the woodwork to support the hatred that Hitler had. He was their leader. And a month later, she received an order to appear before a Nazi tribunal. She was accused of not letting her babysitter go to the doctor, which was a fabrication. Most Jews appeared at places like that. No, never were seen or heard from again, but you had to go because you knew that they would take it out on your family, on your children. So she went and she garnered up all her courage. And instead of being meek and mild, she yelled at her accusers, telling them to come up with a better complaint. She hadn't had a babysitter. Babysitters were for employed people, not for unemployed Jews that were under the gun. They let her go. But all those events pointed out that our family had to leave Vienna in a hurry, that this was not going to blow over. My mom didn't want to leave her parents. They said they wanted to stay. We're old. They won't hurt people that are old, but you've got to take the children out of the way, of harm's way. And you'll come back when everything, all this madness is over. My grandmother lied. Since my father had lost his job in June, my grandparents supported us. It costs money to travel to another country. And it left them without money, my grandparents without money. They were vulnerable at that point. And my mother never told me about this because she was so guilty. She carried that guilt around with her for the rest of her life. But she knew that my grandparents had made the ultimate sacrifice to save our lives, to save my life, and tell you the story. The majority of Jews wanting to leave Vienna had no way out. You see, the world shut its doors in our faces. Just as we have immigration problems today all over the world, they had them then. To enter a country, you need a visa. You need to guarantee that you won't be a burden on the state, that you won't need welfare, that you won't need health care, or take away jobs from citizens of a country. We had no money to do that, nor did the thousands upon thousands of Jews wanting to flee to safety before the November 10th. Think about it. Do any of you know anybody outside of the country or even in the country that could support you and your family under those circumstances? Very difficult. But we were lucky. My father's sister was married to an Englishman, and he forged bank accounts to show the authorities that he could support us. It was a lie, but it was the only way that we could get out. We knew, my parents knew, that if we were caught, we would be deported. A lot of people were left and were sent back. But we had no other choice. So we left Vienna by train on November 6th, my mother's birthday, 3 days before Kristallnacht, 3 days before the deadline, the night of shattered glass, when the Nazis destroyed Jewish homes, businesses, houses of worship, burning books, breaking glass, stealing, looting, beating us, and arresting us and placing us into ghettos. And until they were transferred to the concentration camps. You can only imagine how difficult it was for my mom to leave Vienna, to leave her parents, her beloved parents, under those circumstances. So she was never able to speak about it for the rest of her life. It was the last time we ever saw or heard from my grandparents. They were taken to the ghetto and then Terezin, where they were sorted in these places like dirty linen for distribution to their final destinations. Records show that my grandmother, Fanny Hertz, was put on a people-jammed cattle car for a 3-day ride without food, without water, full of human excrement, to Poland, where she was made to strip naked, walk up a hill to a pit, and there she and hundreds of other poor souls were shot dead and dumped into a pit. I think if I'm, today that pit is in Belarus. It's in the news today that Belarus is having, problems, protests. It could be the dead protesting. I don't know. Put all that into context. Think about it. Imagine if terrorists came here and told you to leave, that you weren't wanted, that you had to leave your home, that you had to leave your family, your language, your jobs, everything that you care about, gone in a few short months. It's totally mind-blowing that something like that could even happen. But it happened to my parents and to me. So when our train reached the border, we had to go through customs. My father left us to get the luggage, while my mother, holding me in her arms and my brother at her skirt, were on the platform waiting for his return. And it took too long, and she started getting very upset. And there was a guard pacing the platform, and, "Please, sir, could you help me? My husband, he's disappeared." But he ignored her. And a little while later, he passed again. And this time, without moving his lips, speaking very lowly, he said, What's your husband's name? And she followed suit and didn't move her mouth and whispered Sigmund Klein. That I was lucky your husband is being interrogated by the SS, and he'll be returned to you. Don't make a fuss, that he said. Don't make a fuss. Just go on your journey and good luck. So my father came back, beaten to within an inch of his life, blood all over, eyes shut. My mother just handed me to him. He could barely hold me. And we passed through the border. And at that point, a man asked my father, "Who beat you so savagely?" And my father just said, "An accident. I fell," because he's afraid to open his mouth and say anything. Could have been a Nazi at wanting more blood. So we finally arrived in London, frightened and depressed. We weren't able to speak the language. We were exhausted and totally in need. But of course, it was a lie. We had nobody meeting us, nobody there, and afraid that we were going to be sent back. So my mother couldn't talk to anybody. She didn't dare. So there were hospitality centers. And finally, she spoke to a woman who spoke German. And it was a private Jewish organization, much like the Jewish Federation. We have organizations all over the world that are organized to help us. And by the way, we help many others that are in need. So they made an appointment for my mother the next day. We were sponsored, supposedly, the false guarantee. My mother was on one line after the other line, being denied help. You have a sponsor, you have somebody who has guaranteed your life. And so she just burst out into tears. And luckily, a very good-looking man came to her aid, and he made it possible for us to stay. I'm mentioning good deeds along this situation because there are good people in this world that are there to help us carry on. They were called, and rightfully so, righteous Christians. Anyway, he got us an apartment, he got us clothing, he made sure that we wouldn't be deported. His name was. But then England went to war with Germany, and all of a sudden we weren't refugees anymore. We were enemy aliens. And my father was taken away. So we thought, without explanation, we thought that he was deported back into the fire. So my mother didn't care at that point what would happen. She figured, I'm going to go home to Vienna. I'm going to be killed with the rest of everybody. What difference does it make anymore? So after my father was taken away, the same people, Scotland Yard, which is like the FBI here, came and picked my mother up and me and my brother Gary and took us to this island called the Isle of Man, which was converted into an internment camp where they sorted us out. They had a lot, they were looking for German spies called the Fifth Column. And we had to be investigated by Scotland Yard very thoroughly to see if we were danger to England. So we were there for 2 years, and it was a civilized prison. But nevertheless, I mean, you know, I was a little girl. The island was beautiful. I loved it. But my parents had lost their freedom, and they had no communication with anybody in the family whatsoever. And not knowing whether my father was dead or alive. But after a year of separation, they had a married camp, and my father shows up. And 9 months later, my little brother, Colin, was born. He was born a very delicate child. My mother didn't want to be pregnant. He suffered all his life. He never had a chance. But that's it. So anyway, Sheridan Russell, our benefactor, vouched for our authenticity and that we were not spies and that we were not a danger. So we were allowed to come back to London in the middle of the Blitz, the heaviest bombings of the war, when German planes dropped bombs day and night, like raindrops, nonstop. And, you know, by that time I was old enough, I knew what the German planes sounded like. They had a heavy, heavy drone like. And we were afraid of being bombed. Of course, how can you not be afraid? But kids don't realize the impact of that. But we did realize the impact of things when they took us away from our parents. They evacuated us, meaning to take us away from the danger. But my brother and I, my older brother, they didn't take the baby away from my parents. My older brother and I didn't want to be with strangers. We didn't want foster parents. We worried about our parents. We wanted to die with them. We didn't want to be orphans with foster parents. And I, day and night and day, till they let us go home. So we came back to London, and we waited out the rest of the war with our parents and our little brother, and with the bombs. Some of the bombs were called doodlebug, passed over our heads like for the rest of the war. Their power in the air was so strong that our house shook from the planes overhead and the bombs. But we went to school every day, 3 buses, because you know what? The English people, nothing stopped them. They try to live a normal life. And we took 3 buses to school every morning and 3 buses home. And England continued their lives, war or no war. So the war ended, and we were finally allowed to come to America. The world had come to understand what had happened. And we were in New York on August 5th, 1946. That's over 74 years ago for me. and we began to build our future, this time as Americans. Like so many other immigrants before us that made this country great from the beginning. My mother became a maid. She was called a day's worker. She made $8 a day working for rich people on Fifth Avenue. And Gary and I sold the milk bottles for the deposit money to get my father downtown. It was only a nickel to get on the subway in those days. But we needed to get my father downtown to look for work. What a life, what a country. Truly an adventure. But before I finish my story, I want to tell you about the scars that this flight from the Holocaust left each member of our family. My grandparents, they lost their lives. They were our very best angels. They sacrificed their lives for us. They gave us everything that they had. My mother to me was a great woman. She gave me strength. She led us through the war with hope for the future. In spite of the guilt that she suffered, having left her parents behind to die. My father, he lost his self-worth. The experience of everything turned him into a screamer, a frustrated man, so angry with himself for not being the man he felt he should have been. Gary, my big brother, he ended hating most people. He wasted his life. He's still wasting it. Colin, my baby brother, never had a chance. He was deprived of nutrition in my mother's womb. He was never able to cope in life. He lived on mental disability. All those experiences gave me the urgency to speak up against wrongs, all wrongs, to know that if we reach out, if we don't turn our backs, we can make this a better world. I've learned that we must embrace our differences. Each of us is so unique, has so much to give. Our diversity is the stuff that's made our nation strong. United we stand, hopefully forever. Our diversity today is something that we must heal. We all have to work toward that. I've learned that with anger and hatred, we can't move forward constructively. I've learned that hate is an all-consuming passion. It doesn't have any place in our lives. And I've learned that we must all bear witness and care about all of the injustices that man, you know, caring is love. And love is man's most winningest trait. And you know what else I've learned? I've learned to trust myself. My eyes, my ears, my mind. I've learned how to think independently. That's very important. So I hope my message to you tonight has been a learning one. Keep it in mind, spread the good word. Thank you. Any questions?
Yes, thank you so much, Trudy. That was truly an honor and privilege for all of us to listen in on your incredible story, and you tell it so beautifully. So we thank you so much for sharing with us today. We have a few questions coming through the chat, if you don't mind my asking. The first question is, did you ever learn what happened to your mother's siblings? I believe you said there were 5.
Well, there were 5 siblings. They all left Vienna before we did. My mother didn't want to leave her parents.
Okay.
So one of them, but they're all dead now. But they all got they all came to New York and lived there during the war. My cousin Raoul is I hate his music, but don't tell.
Oh, I think we lost you for a second. Oh, okay.
He's a composer of note, does atonal stuff, but he's very well known. His name is Raoul Pleskow. He's in New York and he's old, but he's still writing music.
So they were all able to leave. The next question was, were you able to return to Vienna ever, and how did you feel about that?
Yes. My mother always loved Vienna. She says, just go there. It's beautiful. Forget the people. Go there. See where you came from. And I went there. And I went to their apartment building, and it was overlooking the Danube Canal in Vienna. Beautiful building. A nice street. So it was security, you know, you couldn't get into the building, but I asked somebody that was going to his apartment, do you think I could go in, and I want to feel my grandparents. So I went to the very top floor and I walked the halls very quietly. I didn't feel anything. I thought I would, but that time is over.
Did the British recognize the internment history of the Isle of Man, and is there any recognition there or memorial?
Well, it's funny. We went to the Isle of Man a few years ago. It's a magnificent island, you know, right in the Irish Sea. And we stayed. I remember the place where we lived. It was a very nice hotel, actually, but it was meant as a prison, and it's all dilapidated and everything. But I remembered a lot. And then we went to the capital. And I went to their museum, and they have very incomplete records. But they were very happy to speak to us and very interested in getting more and more information. England, I don't think that they really addressed the internment camp, but you could look up the It's called Russian, Rushen, internment camp on the Isle of Man. And it's in the history books, but there's not that much information. My brother's birth certificate, I have it, but they don't. Strange.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. I know if anyone is interested, I've seen a little bit of information at the British War Museum about it in London, but it's pretty minimal, but they do have a small little bit of information on it. If anyone wants to look on their website, or if we're ever traveling again, you can check it out there. The next question is, I know you were young at the time, but do you remember ever feeling scared?
Well, I don't know if I was scared, but we had to have blackouts during the air raids. And we had to have all the lights out in the house. And Gary and I, my older brother Gary and I, peeked out of the window, and we could see the searchlights looking for the German planes and everything. And my brother Gary said to me, "Oh, Gertie," we both had English accents. "Oh, Gertie, I think we ought to say our prayers." And I said, "Oh, Gary, but I don't know any prayers." He says, "Well, listen to me." He says, "Repeat after me. Shema Yisrael." That's how I learned how to say my prayers.
So there was some belief, something pulling it all together, if that's what he thought to do in that moment.
Yeah.
We're also getting a lot of questions about your relationship with your mother, and do you still feel that you connect with her even now, 20 years later?
Yes, I do connect with her. Strange things happen. I can't explain them, but the one that comes to mind was that my grandson was being born in China, in Beijing. My son and daughter-in-law are human rights attorneys, so they were in China. That's another outcome. Very active. Our family has been active for people. The experience has made us that way. I forgot what I was saying.
And your grandson was being born in Beijing, and your connection with your mother?
No, but the connection with my mother.
Yes.
The baby was due around Christmas time. And I lived in Philadelphia, and here in North Jersey. And so it was Christmas Eve, and I wanted to go to see my mother to make sure that my grandchild would be born healthy, strong, and everything. I go to the cemetery a lot. And so the traffic was awful because it was Christmas Eve and we had to turn back. So the next day was Saturday, and the cemetery, the Jewish cemetery, is closed on Shabbos. And so I sneaked in through another cemetery and got in and asked my mother to please do her work. She was always very close to God. Make sure that the baby's good and everything goes well. And so I left the cemetery, and later my son calls me from Beijing and says that Jennifer is in labor. And the baby was born like within an hour. We had just gotten home to Philadelphia when the baby was born. You have to be able to understand signs.
That's wonderful. This will be our last question, and it's a really important one. Have you ever connected with the man in London that helped your family, or anybody else that helped your family?
Yes. We stayed very close to Sheridan. He was an amazing man. Actually, there's so much written about him in my book with actual letters from him, for over many years. He was a captain in the British Army Intelligence. He was a cellist for the Monaco Orchestra. He was the most amazing man you could ever meet in the world. There's a book written about him. He became an alamona. That's the British term for a social worker. Well after we left America. But his caring for us lasted a lifetime. And the day he died, he asked his wife to send us a letter that he had written. So the letter is such an amazing letter. He says, I died today, but I wanted, I'm sending it to you because I know your mother would mind it so much. And so my mother and I flew to London for a celebration of his life. So many years later, when he died, he died a year after my father died. My father died in 1981. So must have been Sheridan died in either 82 or 83 years old. I don't remember when that was. Oh yeah, my father was born in 1900. So that was it, in 1983. But we stayed in touch with him, and he was the most wonderful man there ever was. And he actually paid for my brother and myself to go to the finest British schools. He paid the tuition. He made sure that when he went to Italy, because he was a captain, that we were taken care of.
That is truly special. And we thank you for sharing that. And I'm so glad we are ending with that, because as we know, and so many stories will tell us, that survivors did not survive unless they had help from somebody else. And if more people were able to help and were able to do that, we know we would have so many more survivors with us, and that were here with us today. And I think that's truly a beautiful lesson, is to focus on those that did good and those that did right, because that truly helped you and your family and all the others that did survive. We have a lot of people saying thank you in the comments, and how inspirational and truly moving your story is, and how wonderful. And I'm so grateful that we were able to share it with so many of you today. Before we conclude, I want to introduce Terry Friedman, the chair of the Center for Volunteerism, to say a few parting words.
Trudy, I was so moved by the stories that you shared with all of us today. I actually have been in Vienna and been to some of the places you described, but I even went on a UJA mission and looked at the impact of the Holocaust, but hearing you tell the stories is just so much more inspiring, insightful, and difficult as well. But the most important thing we can all do is to continue to tell Trudy's story. And I encourage everyone to use your social media platforms to share what you learned today. And please use the hashtags Never Forget Is Now and IamGMW. And as Elise said, maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, call someone, see someone socially distant, and share what you learned today. And we can really double the impact of the program that we just had. And another thing that you can do is, after the Passover holiday, we will be observing Yom HaShoah. And we hope you can join us for a virtual community-wide commemoration on April 7th at 7 p.m. On behalf of everyone here today, thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at other community programming, and we hope that you will stay in touch with the Holocaust Council and participate in future events that we sponsor, because it really is a wonderful way to perpetuate the story and to meet truly remarkable people like Trudy and really hear firsthand history and how to prevent this from ever happening again. Thank you.